Good afternoon. My name is Blake Dorse, Division Chief with the Oceanside Fire Department. I'll introduce who we have in front of you today. Starting to my left, City Manager Jonathan Borrego, Mayor Esther Sanchez, Deputy Mayor Ryan Keim, and Council Member from District 1, Eric Joyce. On my right, Fire Chief David Parsons, Deputy Fire Chief Jess Specht, Lifeguard Sergeant Jonathan Chesner, and City Engineer Brian Thomas. We'll begin today with an update on the fire operations from Deputy Fire Chief Jessamine Specht.
All right, thank you everyone for coming out today. We're going to give you a brief update on the work that took place over the weekend since our last press conference. One thing I did want to kind of bring to light was we looked at some of the tapes and ran some of the numbers, and our Marine Safety Unit, which is staffed by 2 lifeguards and 1 firefighter, put the first water on the fire 9 minutes after the first 911 call. So really kind of highlight how important that fireboat and that unit is to our city. This morning at 0700 we hit our final benchmark, which is lost stopped. And by lost stopped, we mean there is no more active burning, there is no more damage being done to the pier. Essentially the fire is completely out. We felt very confident with that. We had about a 18-hour window from yesterday afternoon till this morning where we saw 0 smoke, 0 activity, and we felt comfortable making that call. Since we last saw everybody, I believe that was Friday or Saturday, the crews did a lot of really hard work. I call it surgical demolition. Our firefighters on the top made our way out to the building itself. Very precarious situation, being 30 feet above the ocean, 1,800 feet off the coast. And we established some safe work zones, and they were able to kind of do some precision demolition to kind of pinpoint some of those hot smoking areas and extinguish those final smoldering spots. Other than that, the crews have done the work. After this afternoon, operationally, we have nothing left to do from a firefighting standpoint, and we will fully transform into the recovery phase.
Next, I'd like to bring up Fire Chief David Parsons to speak on the condition and use of the building, as well as some preliminary investigation findings.
All right, good afternoon. So I want to give some context, answer some questions about the status of the buildings just before the fire started. Brine box was in operation. In the brine box, they have a cooktop with a hood suppression system, kind of standard kitchen, but in a very miniaturized format. Because it's small, a part of their operation was being done in the rubies, and I'll get to that in just a moment. There's also a sprinkler head in the brine box. So that's a life safety system that was attached to the Ruby's life safety sprinkler system. It did activate, but being an exterior fire, interior sprinkler heads are not designed to put out a fire like that. There were 2 people working in the brine box at the time. So in the Ruby's, brine box was using the kitchen for prep. No real cooking going on. The only heat source that was present in the Ruby's was a hot plate that they would use for hot chocolate, and it was a warm day, no hot chocolate was being made at that time. No activity was going on in the rest of the building at that time. In fact, it was in sort of a pause state after being demolished to get ready for a new tenant. So no active remodeling was being done. Building was essentially inactive. Definitely not derelict, definitely not abandoned, just in a closed state awaiting permits and plans to get a new tenant into the space. Smoke alarms did activate in the Rubies. Sprinkler system did activate in the Rubies. Again, those are interior life safety systems, not designed to stop a fire that's coming from the exterior, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. And everything worked as designed and normal in those buildings. All right, so for preliminary findings, anything I say here is subject to further testing and investigation, but I'll let you know where we are right now. We've identified the area of origin to be the northwest corner outside of the building. No evidence of an incendiary or intentional act was found. We did have an accelerant detection canine provided by ATF and operated by San Diego Fire and Rescue MASS, which is their arson team personnel. That canine found 0 hits and 0 interest. The 0 interest is a separate data point which speaks to there's not even a hint of any potential accelerants in the area as far as the dog is concerned. What that does is it leaves us with accidental causes as the most likely explanation, but that doesn't mean we can necessarily say it was one thing or another, because you have to have a particular device identified that may have failed, and due to the fire and due to potentially falling in the ocean, we're not able to get there. So what we can't rule out is an electrical heat source at the moment. Again, subject to further investigation, subject to further testing, a formal report will be written in a team. One report involves the Bureau of ATF and the Oceanside Fire Department Fire Investigation Unit to wrap that into a package that will be distributed and will be the official findings at the end. Lastly, the fire suppression system that runs along the pier was brand new, finalized in January of this year. It worked flawlessly. We used it as quickly as we could at the beginning. There were 2 additional hose lines put on the ground, approximately 1,700 feet of hose. That's a monumental effort by lifeguards, EMTs, fire personnel to run those 2 hose lines 1,700 feet down this pier. All of that was just due to the fact that it was a very large fire requiring a lot of water. That's all I have for you on that. There will be a time for questions in a moment. Thank you.
Next up, I'd like to bring City Manager Jonathan Borrego to speak to our Emergency Operations Center activation and emergency proclamation.
Thank you for coming out this afternoon. Upon news of the fire, the city did immediately activate its Emergency Operations Center, and it continues to operate at a level 3. Activating the emergency response system allowed us to essentially collect all of our resources that we had available to us at the city to ensure a coordinated response, which made a big difference in terms of our ability to communicate internally to ensure that we were putting all the resources that we could that were necessary to coordinate the response to the fire. As was mentioned, we also issued a proclamation of a local emergency, which we expect our City Council to formally ratify later this week. By issuing that emergency proclamation, it allows us to expedite our procurement process and also allows us to seek federal and state reimbursement should those funds become available to us. So again, we expect that formal ratification to take place later this week. I also wanted to mention that we are extremely thankful for the responses that were provided by our partnering agencies, including our neighboring cities. Clearly, without those extra resources that were made available to us, without hesitation, the situation could have been much worse. We understand the importance of this pier and what it means to the community, its history. It is the heart and soul of our city, and we will be doing everything that we certainly can to expedite the rebuilding process once we have a better handle on the extent of the damage. Thank you.
I'd now like to touch on beach and water quality in the area. The County Department of Environmental Health has tested the water, as has already been reported, and found it to be clean for use. As such, we are allowing swimmers and surfers to re-enter the water. The beach cleanup efforts continue. Teams have removed over 75 large bags of debris, and they will continue to monitor the beach to make sure that it is clean for use. Next up, to talk about some of the safety items that we're still having effect around the pier area, is Lifeguard Sergeant Jonathan Chestner.
Thank you, Chief. We worked with the Coast Guard to set up a restricted area 100 yards from the pier for all boats, vessels. In addition, our standard 100 feet from the pier still applies for all swimmers and surfers, advising them all to stay away from the hammerhead as well.
Thank you. Now I'd like to address what's been on everybody's mind within the community, and that's when is the pier going to reopen. We do not have a time certain of when we're going to do that, but I can assure you that all of the city leaders want this pier open as quickly as possible so the community can continue to enjoy that. As such, we're working with a fencing contractor currently to have fences put up to keep people limited access from the end of the pier where the investigation is continuing and where there's obviously a hazard. With that being said, as soon as possible, we are going to reopen the pier to the public, and we should have 75% of this pier back open to the public as quickly as possible. At this time, I'd like to open it up to any questions.
You mentioned there's going to be a formal report. Can you talk about who's involved in that and how long it will take?
Sure, I'll let Fire Chief David Parsons handle that.
You're referring to what I said on a formal investigation report? Yeah, that's going to take some time. It could be a few weeks. They have to send potentially some things out for lab testing and samples, and they do still have to finish interviews. So I can't put a time on it. Minimum of weeks. It could be a little longer than that. It's the best I got for you.
You mentioned that this appears to be accidental in nature. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is the case at this time and what has led to this?
Yeah, so in fire investigations, you know, we look at what we can rule out and what we can't rule out. And everything leads us to believe, based on canine reports, videos, witness interviews, fire dynamics, which is how fire moves, and then also patterns that we see in the structure. Everything leads us to believe that an incendiary liquid, which could be indicative of potential arson, none of that's present. We have a lot of video evidence, both from the city and from the public. And then the witness interviews, a lot of statements and interviews point to something going on outside the building and potentially under the deck. That's why I have it kind of at an area of origin, is the northeast corner. We haven't nailed down to a point of origin. Ideally, that's where we want to get, but I don't know if we're going to get there with how much damage is out there. So the other cause I might look at would be a natural thing. Lightning, for example, would be an obvious one. Weather does not lend itself to any of that day. So really, by the process of elimination, we're going to the accidental cause, but that doesn't mean we can 100% nail it down because we don't have the device or the item that may have actually been involved. And that may or may not ever be found. Question here.
Northwest.
My apologies, northwest corner. So the only other agency that we've had involved in the investigation would be San Diego Fire Rescue, MAST, which brings up their arson, accelerant canine detection animal. Yeah, nobody else. Sorry, the Oceanside Fire Department has a fire investigation unit. That's the team that's doing the work. And we're the authority having jurisdiction on that, so we're the agency that's going to lead the final findings.
Can you give us a description of the damage? Is it tops of the pilings? Is it just the deck? You can describe in detail what detail you have.
Deputy Chief Speck has the closest bird's eye on that and can give some information.
Yeah, the damage to the building is your standard damage to any fire-consumed building. We had roof collapse, we peeled apart the walls, smoldering pile of rubble, essentially. As far as the pier itself, on the westernmost side of the pier is where we saw most of the damage, and we have areas 2 to 3 feet burned all the way through the 4-inch planks that run across the pier, and as well as several of the cross members below those planks. So there's been significant damage to both the pier and the deck. We have not been able to really get any kind of good visual on any of the pylons. Whether those are damaged beyond repair or not, that'll require some expertise to bring in to help us with that investigation as far as what the damage is there. But significant damage to the decking of the pier itself. And again, I know we've been saying about 90%. We're pushing more 95%, what was saved. So really the damage is really limited to the hammerhead itself.
This is the 6th Oceanside Pier. It's 38 years old. I don't know who this city engineer. Yeah.
Piers are generally built to last about 50 years to 100 years, depending on the materials used. We anticipated this one to last a lot longer than it has, and as everybody else has said before, much of the pier is still intact for still being 38 years old. So the fact that we had this accident leads me to believe that there's no real reason to have any issues with the current construction, and still enjoy many, many years to come for the existing.
Yes, sir. Let Jess answer that.
Yeah, so it was made probably within the first 5 minutes that there was going to be a defensive fire. And for us, offensive means we're actually going to be taking our firefighters inside the building. Defensive means we're going to fight the fire from outside the building, putting big water on it. And the initial incident commander called for a defensive fire on the Ruby's building itself within the first 3 to 5 minutes of the fire. So we knew right away we were not going to be entering any buildings. And I would say probably 3 hours afterwards, when we kept getting reports of fire running underneath the pier, that's when we decided to make that trench cut, which was essentially when we said, this is where we're drawing our line. We're not going to lose anything beyond that point. Both buildings. The amount of fire they were seeing, in our risk management plan is we'll risk a lot to save a savable life. We'll risk a little to save savable property. And we're not going to risk anything for what's already lost. In the fire conditions, what we saw, it was already lost. So we weren't going to risk life or limb or even an injury putting anyone near those two buildings.
This is, I guess, for the city manager or the mayor. We've all heard so many egregious, outrageous rumors that people came up with and posted them online. I'd like to know your one or two most egregious rumors that picture headlines about this that you would like to dispel and say there's absolutely no truth. I don't know.
You want me to take that? There are indeed a lot of wild rumors out there, and I think it's safe to say that the majority of them are untrue, if not all of them. I'm not going to speak to any specific rumors because I don't want to spread them by mentioning them. But as the fire chief mentioned, the cause was not ill-intentioned. We have determined that thus far. We have ruled that out. So any of those rumors, I can dispel it right here and right now.
Can you or maybe the engineer say how, when the lights are out at night, anytime to see how soon we expect the pier to be lit up again, and how long will it take to remove what's left of the building?
I believe we're still evaluating the timeline of how long it's going to take. As far as the lighting is concerned, that is a concern for us is in regards to boater safety. At night with the lights off, we don't want any boats hitting the pier, obviously, so we have portable light stands that are going to be lit up every single night to ensure that the public safety is at the top of our priority list until we can get the electrical back going and the lights on the pier. I think I can answer that as far as the 75% portion being opened. We anticipate that as soon as possible, sooner than later. We just need to keep people away from the end of the pier, and so we need portable fencing to do that. In addition to that, the city engineer has already determined that the structure is sound where we're going to allow the public to enter. The final piece would be just getting the pier cleaned up from some of the very superficial damage that occurred from our firefighting operations. I don't want to venture to say exactly when we would open it, but I feel comfortable saying that we're going to do it as soon as possible, and we have a vested interest in reopening the pier. I wouldn't venture to say days or weeks. I would just venture to say that we'll do it as quickly as possible.
Would Memorial Day be a target date that you would try to get?
we would certainly be very mindful of the holiday.
Are you going to put the names, tax on the names of the services to those that are?
That's definitely something that we've considered and begun initial talks about. Right now, obviously, our concern was getting the fire under control, completing the overhaul process, and making sure we have the emergency proclamation, the emergency operations center up and running. But that is something that we are discussing as how that looks going forward. That's still something that we'll need to continue to discuss and evaluate as time goes on.
City engineer question, in the late 70s there was significant damage to the end of the pier, and the media used to report, they call it amputation, where they actually cut off part of the pier. And as I understand it, the hammerhead part, that's needed to stabilize the pier, and then the pier started swaying, which led to the new pier a few years later. Is there any discussion of amputation and taking away part of the structure of the pier?
Not at this time.
What's your thoughts on us getting a tour of out on the deck?
I think that's a possibility. All right, if that's all the questions, I'm going to open it up to some final thoughts from the fire chief, the city manager, and our elected officials.
So I'm not going to name every agency that helped us out. I think you've heard me try to do that. There's too many, and I'll miss somebody. But just know from the bottom of our hearts that the fire department, I'll let the city leaders express their thoughts, but from the city's point of view, we couldn't have done this without our help from local, county, state, and federal assistance. There's been so many positive things. The two I'll call out specifically because of their efforts were Manson, which is the contractor doing the harbor dredge. They brought out their private tug, which had fire capabilities, and we engaged them. And then SDG&E's helitanker 729, which made a big difference early on in the firefight. Other than that, all of our partners, from me to you, thank you. We couldn't have done it without you. Thanks.
And I would just close by also thanking our city team. Absolutely did an exemplary job of a coordinated effort, and I wish you could see the perspective that I had in terms of how smoothly the team operated, but without the coordinated efforts from our own local staff, again, the situation could have been a lot worse, but the response was immediately and incredibly effective. With that, I'd like to introduce Mayor Sanchez for a few words.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Words cannot express this deep gratitude that I have and the pride that I have for the folks that work for us, for the city of Oceanside, especially our police officers, firefighters, lifeguards, our defenders. There is no other city that could boast this kind of public safety that came to the aid of our city, the aid of a very, very beloved pier that at the base is 100 years old, and the rest of it has changed over time. But this is 100 years. This is a 100-year, a century fire that has never happened before. It's never been tried. And our firefighters got there within 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The first boat, and we're going to have all kinds of stories to hear and share about the tremendous courage that they have, that we had practicing on that day. The first boat that went out there for 19 hours, taking only a couple of breaks. The next boat that got there, and this is from the fire department, another day and a half. There is so much courage here that it's just amazing. We'll be sharing those stories. Moving forward, I am eternally grateful for our elected officials. Congressman Mike Levin has been calling us and telling us he's right there wanting to help. He actually joined us at a press conference. We also have Senator Blake Spear and also Assemblymember Davies. So we are very grateful that we've got this support. We want to rebuild as soon as possible. That is something that I've heard all over Oceanside, that we want her back as soon as possible. There are other things that we need to talk about, is the restaurant. We'll be wanting to hear from the whole community, right? But at the very least, we're going to bring back 1,954 feet, so it is the longest wooden pier again on the West Coast. So again, I thank you very much. I will be signing the request for emergency meeting as mayor, and so that we can go ahead and have vote on to have the emergency state of emergency for the city of Oceanside. I mean, this again, this fire, and what you saw, how you saw us, our firefighters, all of our public safety react. This has never happened before. An urban fire of this magnitude has never happened before, and I'm just so proud. I'm just so proud of our staff moving forward and ensuring that we are going to work together to make sure, and that means as a community too, to bring her back. Thank you very much.
I would like to next introduce Deputy Mayor Ryan Keim.
Thank you all for coming today. It's something that I think hasn't been stated enough. I really want to thank our residents and visitors. This happened on a Thursday evening during Sunset Market, and they were phenomenal in letting our first responders do their job and save 95% of the pier. It couldn't have happened without the cooperation of our residents here. One thing, I got down there early into the event on Thursday. One thing that really hit home for me was watching our first responders, fire and lifeguards, many of whom grew up here and have those same memories of the pier that everyone else does. So to see them fighting for their pier and putting in that work to save it was incredible. So again, thank you so much to watch our firefighters go out there and do everything they can to save it, and I am just eternally grateful. And I'll finish with this. In politics, there's a lot of things our city council, we don't always see eye to eye on. That's why it's important you see us all here today, is we're united in getting this pier up and running as soon as possible. So we stand together with this, and we're going to do everything we can to get it restored. So thank you very much.
And next, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Eric Joyce, District 1 Representative.
When we saw the smoke coming over the tops of the hotels, our city had a collective nightmare come true. As we arrived down here, we could see our lifeguards and our firefighters putting every breath into trying to save first lives and then a pier that we all hold so dear. In the days that followed, I got messages from around the world. People had just seen images or video of what was happening here and broke out into sobs because of the special memories that they have in this space with a loved one taking their first steps or having their children with them on the pier over the last couple decades. So I cannot say enough how we are just honored to have the best of the best protecting our citizens, and I know that our city, along with all those around our region who consider Oceanside their beach, are thankful for them as well.
All right, that concludes the conference in regards to taking media up on the pier. I'm happy to accommodate that. We'll be doing that immediately following this. A couple safety items. We're going to stay 5 feet back from the trench, 5 feet east of the trench. We will not be going on to the other side of the trench, but you're more than welcome to take any video or camera footage as needed on the pier. This is going to be close to just the press, so general members of the public, if you could be respectful in the press tour and just stay down here. All right, thank you.
KOCT, the voice of North County.